What would you do if an 8-year-old girl handed you a broken phone, then exposed a betrayal so deep it nearly destroyed your entire legacy? It was just another Monday in Silicon Valley. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Voxera Systems, where fortunes were built on algorithms and trust was a currency more fragile than gold. Ethan Caldwell, 30, sat at the head of a gleaming glass conference table. A tech prodigy turned billionaire, he'd revolutionized voice AI and made his company the cornerstone of next-generation digital security. But behind his tailored suit and brilliant eyes lived a man who had long stopped believing in people. And yet he'd taken a risk. 6 months earlier, he'd adopted Zoe, a quiet 8-year-old girl who had lost her parents in a car crash. He had told himself it was the right thing to do. He signed the papers, paid for the best private tutors, filled her room with smart toys and books, and built a bedroom suite in his mansion that looked like something out of a dream. But there was one thing missing: connection. Ethan didn't know how to be a father. He knew how to build empires, not bedtime routines. He avoided eye contact, preferred data to feelings, and told himself that offering safety and comfort was enough. Zoe knew better. She hadn't spoken much since she came to live with him, but she watched closely. And on that particular morning, as Ethan presented VoiceGuard, his latest AI innovation, to a room full of executives, Zoe stood quietly in the back of the room beside Ms. Louise Bennett, the housekeeper who had been with Ethan's family since he was 10. The presentation was going well, charts, applause, numbers going up. Everyone seemed pleased, until Zoe walked forward. She tugged gently on Ethan's sleeve. He glanced down, surprised to see her there. She didn't usually interrupt, especially not at work. She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "That phone isn't yours." The room fell quiet. Every executive turned. A few looked amused, others confused. A child in a boardroom. Ethan flushed. He gave her a tight smile and leaned down. "Zoe, sweetheart, we've talked about boundaries. This is a business meeting." But she didn't flinch. She pointed to a sleek black phone lying on the table right next to Ethan's usual device. "That one," she whispered. "It's not the same." Ethan glanced at it, mildly annoyed. Same model, same case. He'd assumed Miss Bennett had cleaned it and moved it slightly, but now he noticed no fingerprint smudges, no familiar scratch on the side. The charging port had a different angle. His fingers hesitated. "I don't understand." "Press play," Zoe said. There was something in her voice. Not fear, not hesitation, just quiet certainty. Against his better judgment, Ethan picked up the unfamiliar phone and opened the voice memo app. There was one file, time-stamped just 20 minutes ago. He pressed play. His own voice filled the room. "The new encryption protocols will be implemented next Tuesday. The source code is stored on the secure server, accessible only through the prototype devices." The room went silent. Every eye turned to him. This was a private conversation, one that had happened 3 days ago, behind closed doors, with only one other person present. Dominic Reese. Ethan's longtime technical director. His friend. The man he had trusted to guard the heart of the company. He looked up, stunned. Dominic sat across the table, eyes wide. "How did that get there?" Dominic asked, his voice a little too calm. Ethan didn't respond. He looked down at Zoe. She wasn't looking at the phone anymore. She was watching people. Dominic, Clarissa. Ethan's girlfriend of 8 months, Sloane Whitaker, sat in the corner, notebook in hand. She looked beautiful, as always. Composed. Concerned. "Is everything okay?" she asked sweetly, but Zoe didn't move. Her brown eyes held steady, and that's when Ethan knew. Something was very, very wrong. Later that evening, Zoe sat beside Miss Bennett at the kitchen island. The air smelled of cinnamon and clove. Outside, the leaves rustled against the windows like whispers of truth waiting to be heard. "Miss Sloane's been stealing," Zoe said softly. "Miss—" Bennett paused, her teacup halfway to her lips. Zoe continued, her tone calm. "She takes things from the test room. Phones, small boxes, sometimes paper. She tells Ethan she's just curious, but she hides them. I saw her put a box in her purse yesterday." Miss Bennett felt the chill run down her spine. "And," Zoe added, reaching into her pocket, "I put one of Ethan's tracking tags on her bag 2 weeks ago." She handed the small chip to the older woman. "The tag stopped yesterday." But the last place it pinged? The boardroom. That night, Miss Bennett lay awake for hours. So did Ethan. He didn't sleep. Couldn't. His thoughts spun. Zoe, the phone, the recording, and behind all of it, a terrible question: who can I trust? The truth was coming. Not in shouts, not in fury, but in whispers. Whispers from a child no one had expected would be the one to see through it all. The next morning arrived quiet, grey, and tense. Ethan Caldwell stood alone in his home office, eyes fixed on a wall of security monitors. He hadn't touched his coffee. He hadn't slept. The voice memo from the mystery phone still echoed in his mind, his own words, recorded without his knowledge. There were only 2 people in that meeting, Ethan and Dominic Reese. So how did it end up on a strange device? He trusted Dominic, had for years. But now, Zoe's whisper wouldn't leave him alone. Meanwhile, Ms. Louise Bennett was watching everything from the kitchen. She had known Ethan since he was 10. She'd seen him broken by betrayal before, when his first business partner sold him out and nearly destroyed Voxera Systems from the inside. She wasn't going to let that happen again, and neither was Zoe. That afternoon, Zoe returned to Ms. Bennett with something small in her hand, a voice recorder. No larger than a lipstick cap. It was one of Ethan's experimental devices, capable of recording high-fidelity audio from 15 feet away for days at a time. "I hid this in the flower vase on his desk," Zoe said calmly. Her voice held no fear, just quiet focus. "You what?" Ms. Bennett asked, both stunned and deeply impressed. "I needed to know," Zoe replied. Her voice didn't tremble, her eyes didn't blink. She had trusted her gut, and her gut had whispered, "Something is wrong." Together they inserted the tiny chip into Zoe's tablet. The screen flickered. The audio file loaded, and then they heard it. Sloane Whitaker's voice. Cool, controlled, confident. "No, he doesn't suspect anything yet. The kid noticed the phone, but he thinks it was just luck. I've been copying prototype data for weeks." Mrs. C. Bennett's stomach dropped. "Grayson's been helpful. Once we get the encryption protocols and source code, Zenith will file first. Ethan will be too busy defending his reputation to stop us." Dominic Reese. He was in on it. Zoe sat perfectly still as the voices played. No triumph, no "I told you so." Just sadness. Because betrayal, even when expected, still hurts. But the worst was yet to come. And the girl. Once this is over, social services will remove her from his custody. Some foster home somewhere. She'll be out of the picture. The words struck Miss Dean Bennett like a slap. This wasn't just about stealing tech. This was about destroying Ethan's life, his company, his home, and the fragile little family he was just starting to build. "She's talking about me," Zoe said softly. Her voice didn't shake, but Miss Dean Bennett's hands did. That evening, Ethan sat across from Sloane in his living room. She poured wine, smiled. To him, she looked radiant, supportive. "Perfect. Maybe I'm just paranoid," he said aloud. "You're under pressure," she replied, brushing his hand. "You're doing the best you can." And that was the moment Zoe knew. Sloane was winning. She was charming, smooth, beautiful. She knew what Ethan needed to hear. She was saying all the right things because she knew what to say, but what she didn't know was that they had her voice on tape. Later that night, as the house went still, Zoe whispered to Miss Bennet, "We can't tell him yet." "Why not?" "Because he loves her. If we tell him now, he'll defend her. He won't believe us." "We need more. We need proof no one can deny." Miss Bennet looked at the little girl in front of her. She wasn't just smart, she was strategic. "All right," the older woman nodded. "Then we wait, but not for long." Over the next 72 hours, Zoe and Miss Bennet watched. Clarisano. Sloane grew bolder. She accessed Ethan's work tablet during breakfast, pretending to clean crumbs. She memorized passcodes with glances. She asked subtle questions about launch timelines, security systems, and file backups. Ethan never noticed, but Zoe did. She saw the way Sloane's voice changed when she asked about Voxera's latest encryption model. She saw the flicker in Dominic's eyes during staff calls. She heard the too casual laughter at jokes about company leaks. Zoe didn't miss anything. By midweek, Sloane announced she was moving in. Ethan, clearly touched, gathered everyone in the kitchen for the news. "Clarissa and I have decided," he said, using her real name, "to make this house our home. We'll be a family. The three of us." Zoe looked up at him, her eyes steady. "Families should be built on truth," she said. Ethan chuckled, misreading the words. "You're wise beyond your years, kiddo." But Miss Bennet caught the meaning. So did Sloane. For a split second, the mask on her face slipped. A flicker of recognition, of calculation. And Zoe saw it. That night, in the safety of the kitchen, Miss Bennet pressed play on the recording again. Sloane's voice filled the room. "Ethan gave me the access code to the safe. After the launch, he'll be ruined. The girl, too. By the time the dust settles, Zenith will have everything." Zoe said nothing. But Ms. Bennet spoke softly, the weight of the moment heavy in her chest. "We show him. Friday morning. We show him everything." Zoe nodded, and then added, "Not just him. Everyone." The kitchen was quiet that Friday morning. Zoe Caldwell stood at the edge of the breakfast counter, arms folded, her face calm but unreadable. Across from her, Ms. Louise Bennet poured steaming coffee into Ethan's favorite mug, the navy blue one he only used on Fridays. They'd rehearsed this moment. They knew what to say. They had the evidence, the recordings, the tracking data. All they needed now was courage. Ethan Caldwell walked in a few minutes later, hair still damp from the shower, a small stack of investor briefs under his arm. "Good morning," he said, reaching for his coffee. "Ethan," Ms. Bennet said gently, "before you get started, there's something we need to show you." Zoe stepped forward. No hesitation. She placed the tiny recorder on the counter. "It's about Miss Sloane." Ethan's face tensed instantly. "Zoe," he said with tired patience, "we've talked about this. I know you're still adjusting, and I understand change is hard, but just listen." Miss Bennet interrupted more firmly than usual. Ethan blinked, and then he pressed play. Sloane's voice filled the kitchen. "The child won't be a problem much longer. Ethan's distracted. He trusts me completely now. The safe codes, the prototype drives, I have them all." Ethan froze. His fingers tightened around the coffee cup. The blood drained from his face. By the time the recording ended, the silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low. Zoe looked up at him. "I've been watching her. She's been stealing from you for weeks." He sat down slowly. The man who had conquered global markets now looked small. "Exposed. This could be fake," he whispered. "Voice technology can be manipulated." "Deepfakes are everywhere. You of all people know that, Zoe." But he wasn't convincing himself. Not really. The recording was too detailed, too specific, too real. "There's more," Zoe said. She pulled out her tablet and opened the tracking app. It showed a map. Red dots, dates, locations. Everyone matched the times Sloane had taken something from the lab or private office. She's been meeting someone from Helix Dynamics every Thursday. Dominic helps her get past your firewalls. Ethan stared at the data. His mind, so brilliant, so analytical, was processing at 1,000,000 miles a minute. And then his shoulders sagged. He believed her now. "I have to take this to the board," he said finally. "Today." Zoe didn't say anything, but Ms. Bennett placed a hand gently on his arm. "Go in strong," she said. "They'll try to twist it." Ethan nodded. Not this time. But things didn't go as planned. That afternoon, in Voxera's sleek executive boardroom, Ethan stood before 12 directors, the audio device in hand. He explained what happened. He played the recording, only it wasn't the same. The audio had been corrupted. Choppy, distorted. Parts of it sounded like Ethan himself was planning to sabotage the company. It was a setup, a deep fake, one done by someone with access to their internal systems. Dominic Reese. And now he sat calmly at the far end of the table, wearing a mask of gentle concern. "I'm afraid Ethan's been under incredible stress," Dominic said to the board. "Single parenthood, a new relationship, it's understandable he's struggling." Ethan stood stunned. "This is a lie." But the board wasn't listening. Janet Holloway, head of the audit committee, sighed. "Ethan, accusing your girlfriend of corporate espionage without clear evidence, this is serious. We're going to need to suspend your executive decision-making until a psychological review can be completed." Ethan's world cracked. "Worse than that. We're also reviewing custody concerns," Janet added gently. "Zoe may need a more stable, structured environment." Ethan didn't argue. He didn't yell. He just sat back in his chair, numb. That night, he sat in his study, alone. The fire in the corner crackled, but the room felt cold. The board had voted. He was out for now. And worse, they were threatening to take Zoe away. He stared at the screen, where an empty inbox blinked at him. No answers, no comfort, just silence. A soft knock. Zoe peeked in. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I was trying to help." Ethan didn't look at her at first. Then slowly, he turned. "No," he said. "You were right. I didn't listen in time." Zoe sat beside him. After a moment, she whispered, "They changed the recording, didn't they?" He nodded. "It's too perfect. It was ready too fast. Someone knew what I was going to do and set a trap." They sat together in silence. Then Zoe asked the question no child should have to ask. "Are they going to send me away?" Ethan's voice cracked. "I won't let them." And that's when something shifted in his eyes. The sadness remained, but behind it, a flicker of fight. Someone had come after his daughter. That was a mistake. Upstairs, Sloane Whitaker was humming to herself as she unpacked the last of her boxes into Ethan's closet. She moved like a queen, surveying her new territory. She thought she'd won. She didn't know that downstairs, Zoe and Ethan had just become a team, and that the game had changed. That night, after Zoe had gone to bed and the house had settled into a deceptive stillness, Ethan Caldwell sat alone in his study, staring at the dark screen of his monitor. The board had humiliated him. His girlfriend had betrayed him. His best friend had helped orchestrate it all. And now, they wanted to take Zoe. His hands curled into fists, but he wasn't defeated. Not yet. Somewhere deep in the vaults of his mind, beneath the anger, the shame, the heartbreak, there was clarity and memory. He remembered something. 3 years earlier, after his first betrayal, when his original co-founder sold their code to a foreign firm, Ethan had gone on a rampage of paranoia. He'd hired private firms, installed backup systems, set up redundant recording devices and security logs, all hidden within the walls of his own home, systems so discreet even he had forgotten about them. But one person hadn't. Downstairs, Ms. Louise Bennett stood in the pantry. Her eyes scanned the rows of neatly labeled dry goods, but she wasn't here for ingredients. She reached behind the spice rack, pressed a small, worn panel. It clicked. A hidden compartment revealed itself, and inside, a tiny black hard drive. She took it gently, reverently, like holding a lifeline. When she turned, Zoe was already there, silent as ever. "You remembered," Zoe said. "Mr. Bennett gave a small smile. "I never forget where the real things are kept." Together, they brought the drive to Zoe's room. She connected it to her tablet. For the next 2 hours, they scrolled through digital memories logs of conversations, backup files, audio pulled from smart speakers and system mics Ethan had long since disconnected. And then, they found it. Dominic's voice. "After next week's press conference, Ethan will be discredited. The board will remove him. You'll be CEO, and Helix will get the full source code." Sloane's reply. "He'll be too busy fighting for custody of the girl to stop anything. Once she's gone, he's alone. That's when we bury him." Zoe didn't flinch, but Mrs. Bennett's lips thinned. She looked like she was holding back fire. "This isn't just betrayal," she said softly. "This is war." They didn't sleep that night. Together, the girl and the woman made a plan. They sorted the evidence into categories. They backed everything up twice, and Zoe said something that chilled Ms. Bennett to the bone. "We wait until the press conference. Because when it happens, they won't be able to spin it. Everyone will hear it at the same time, and no one will be able to shut it off." The next morning, Ethan stood at the window, still unsure of what he had left. He heard footsteps behind him. It was Zoe. She handed him the drive. Her voice steady. "There's something you need to hear." He plugged it in and listened. As the voices played, Sloane, Dominic, the conspiracies, the strategy to destroy him, Ethan didn't say a word, but his expression changed, from confusion to realization to fury, then finally to resolve. That afternoon, Clarisano, Sloane Whitaker found Ethan sitting in the living room with a pen and a notepad. "Working?" she asked, cheerful. He smiled at her. That quiet, dangerous kind of smile. "Just preparing for tomorrow." "Good," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This is going to change everything." He nodded. "It will." At dinner, they sat like a family. Zoe ate her vegetables. Sloane poured wine. Ethan smiled politely, but beneath the surface, each was playing a different game, and only Zoe and Ethan knew the real one. Later that night, when Sloane was on a long phone call coordinating her final moves with Helix Dynamics, Zoe and Ms. Bennett transferred everything to a secure cloud folder. They shared it with 3 people: Agent Camille Rhodes, Cybercrimes Division FBI, 2 trusted board members Ethan had handpicked years ago. Then they set the countdown timer for 2:00 p.m. tomorrow. The moment of truth. Meanwhile, Sloane stood on the balcony, looking over the city lights. She felt invincible. Dominic had rewritten the boardroom files. They had faked Ethan's mental health profile. The media would believe their version, and once Ethan was out, she and Dominic would walk away with billions. The girl, forgotten. The man, destroyed. What she didn't know was that the girl had already rewritten the ending, and the man had finally remembered how to fight back. That night, Ethan walked into Zoe's room. She was sitting on her bed, braiding her own hair, a quiet routine that calmed her when she was thinking. He sat beside her. "Zoe," he said. She looked up. "I'm proud of you. I should have listened sooner." "You're listening now," she said softly. "That's what matters." He reached into his jacket and handed her a piece of paper. She unfolded it. It was the new adoption papers. Signed, witnessed, legal. "I'm not letting anyone take you away," Ethan said, "no matter what happens tomorrow." Zoe blinked hard but didn't cry. She leaned into him. And for the first time, Ethan Caldwell held his daughter like a father who truly knew what he had to lose. Saturday dawned grey and cool. A thin fog hung over the city skyline, blurring the outline of Voxera Systems' sleek headquarters. Inside, the building was anything but calm. It was launch day, the press conference, the moment Sloane Whitaker and Dominic Reese had been orchestrating for months. The moment they would finally push Ethan Caldwell out of his own company, discredit his mind, and erase his voice. But what they didn't know was that this would be their last move, not his. Backstage at the Voxera auditorium, Ethan stood in front of a mirror. His tie was already straight, his speech rehearsed. But he wasn't thinking about his lines. He was thinking about Zoe and truth. In the corner, Sloane adjusted her blazer, her smile as polished as the cameras waiting outside. "You look great," she said, smoothing his lapel. "Thanks," he replied, his voice steady. He no longer looked at her the same way. He didn't see a partner. He saw a performance, one that was about to be cancelled. In the audience, reporters from tech giants like Wired, Forbes, and TechCrunch filled the front rows. Investors sat behind them, eyes on quarterly projections, and scattered among them, agents from the FBI in plain clothes, watching everything. Near the back, Zoe Caldwell sat quietly next to Ms. Louise Bennett. Zoe wore a simple navy dress. In her lap, her tablet. The countdown was set. 200 p.m. Press play. End the game. Ethan stepped onto the stage at exactly 1:59. The applause was polite, the anticipation sharp. He began the presentation the way they expected. "Today, we introduce VoiceGuard AI, our most advanced behavioral prediction system, built to secure not just devices but human interaction itself." Slides clicked forward. Numbers, graphs. Excitement built in the room. But at 2:01 p.m., Zoe tapped her screen, and everything changed. The presentation slide froze. For a moment, confusion rippled across the room. Then, through the auditorium's state-of-the-art speakers, a voice emerged. "Not Ethan's, Sloane's. Ethan gave me the codes last night. After the launch, he'll be finished. Helix Dynamics gets the source code. We get full control." Gasps filled the room. Camera crews turned from Ethan to Sloane, but the audio didn't stop. Dominic's voice joined in. "We leak the mental health file. The board will suspend him. He'll lose custody of the girl. Once he's isolated, we bury him." The room erupted in chaos. Sloane stood frozen for 3 full seconds, then bolted toward the exit, but Agent Camille Rhodes was already there. "Sloane Whitaker," she said calmly, flashing her badge, "you're under arrest for industrial espionage, conspiracy to commit fraud, and multiple violations of federal cyber law." Sloane turned, wild-eyed. "You can't prove anything." "We just did," the agent replied. She snapped the cuffs on as cameras clicked. Dominic stood at the back of the stage, trying to slip into the wings, but another agent was waiting there too. "Mr. Reese," the man said quietly, "you've got some explaining to do." Dominic didn't resist. He knew it was over. His face crumbled, not with guilt, but disbelief. He had underestimated a child. Ethan remained on stage, hands steady on the podium. The audience stared at him in stunned silence. "This technology," he said, voice calm, "was built to protect people, not manipulate them. And thanks to 2 people who never stopped believing in what's right, it will do exactly that." He looked toward the back where Zoe sat. She didn't wave. She simply nodded. That evening, the media exploded. Tech CEO exposes corporate coup in live demo. 8-year-old girl helped crack billion-dollar espionage plot. VoiceGuard AI to reshape cybersecurity, now with ethics at the helm. But inside the Caldwell home, there were no cameras. No flashing lights, just peace. Ethan made dinner himself for the first time in months. Grilled cheese at Zoe's request. Ms. Bennett lit a candle at the table. Soft jazz played in the background. It felt like a home again, not a fortress. As they ate, Ethan turned to Zoe. "There's something I've been meaning to ask." She looked up. "When this is all behind us, if you ever wanted to work in cybersecurity or even the FBI, I'd support that. Fully." Zoe smiled faintly. "I think I want to help people who don't get heard." Ethan nodded. "You already do." Later that night, as Zoe practiced piano and Ms. Bennett cleaned up the dishes, Ethan stood at his office window, phone buzzing with messages he chose not to check. He looked out at the city, not from a place of power, but from a place of peace. Behind him, Zoe's voice floated through the hallway. "Dad, can you help me with this song?" He turned, smiling. And for the first time in his adult life, Ethan Caldwell left his work behind without regret. 6 weeks had passed since the press conference, since the arrests, since the truth finally spoke louder than the lies. And in that short time, everything had changed. Ethan Caldwell was no longer just the tech genius behind VoiceGuard. He was now a symbol of integrity in an industry often accused of doing too much, too fast, with too little thought. He had turned down 3 major licensing deals, rejected 2 offers to sell his company. Instead, he stood before reporters and said, "Innovation without ethics is just destruction dressed in code." The tech world listened. But the biggest transformation wasn't public, it was personal. Inside the house once ruled by silence and automation, there was now life. Mornings began not with startup chimes, but with Zoe's footsteps down the stairs, still wearing mismatched socks, clutching her favorite book. "Toast or waffles today, Dad?" she'd ask. "Both," Ethan would reply, pouring coffee. "And don't tell Miss Bennett." Ms. Louise Bennett would overhear from the kitchen anyway. She always did, and she'd smile to herself as she added cinnamon to the batter, because this was what she had always hoped for. A house with heart. Zoe no longer needed to sneak around with recorders. She no longer worried about being sent away. She no longer felt like a guest in her own home. Because now, this was her home. And Ethan? He was no longer just a provider, or a protector, or a man recovering from betrayal. He was a father. One rainy afternoon, Zoe came home from school with a folder full of papers and a quiet look on her face. Ethan noticed immediately. "Trouble?" She shook her head, then held up a sheet. "Hero's essay assignment, due Friday." "I don't know what to write," she said. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. "You took down 2 corporate spies and saved my company. You sure you're not the hero?" Zoe gave him a look. "You can't write about yourself," she said matter-of-factly. Ms. Bennett walked in, drying her hands on a towel. "You could write about Ethan." Zoe thought about it, then softly said, "Maybe." That night, she sat at her desk for over an hour, then crept downstairs. "Can I read you something?" she asked. Ethan and Ms. Bennett sat on the couch, mugs of tea in hand. Zoe cleared her throat and began, "Most people think heroes wear capes, or fly planes, or fight fires. But I think a hero is someone who listens especially when it's hard. Someone who believes you, even when the world says not to. My dad is my hero. He didn't believe me at first. That hurt. But when he finally did, he didn't run. He stood up. He fought for me, even when people told him he couldn't win. And he never gave up, even when they tried to take everything. Including me. He's not perfect. But real heroes aren't. They're just people who choose love over fear. And truth over comfort. That's my dad." By the end, Ms. Bennett was dabbing her eyes. Ethan couldn't speak. Zoe looked up. "You okay?" He pulled her into a hug. "I am now." 2 days later, at her school's assembly, Zoe read the essay aloud. A few kids looked surprised. Some teachers teared up. In the back row, Ethan sat with Miss Bennett, holding a bouquet of daisies and a heart too full for words. For years, he had built empires with code. Now, he was watching something far more lasting grow in front of him. Back at home, the pace of life had shifted. Ethan still ran Voxera, but his office now had a second chair, a smaller one, with Zoe's name on it. She came in after school to help, which often meant asking difficult questions like, "Shouldn't your AI stop people from lying, not just detect it?" Or, "Why don't you build something that helps kids in court speak without being scared?" She didn't realize it yet, but she was already shaping the next evolution of his work. Not as an engineer, but as his conscience. One quiet evening, as they watched the sunset from the backyard, Zoe turned to Miss Bennett. "Were you scared?" Miss Bennett didn't ask when. She knew exactly what Zoe meant. "Yes," she replied, "but I was never alone." Zoe nodded. "That's how I feel now." She turned to Ethan. "You're stuck with me, you know." Ethan smiled. "Best deal I've ever made." Later that night, Zoe taped something to her bedroom wall. A simple sheet of paper. On it, in her neatest handwriting, "Real families are built when people fight to stay, not when they're afraid to leave." Underneath, she drew 3 stick figures. One tall man with messy hair, one tiny girl in pigtails, and a lady with glasses holding a giant frying pan. It wasn't art, but it was everything. Autumn had arrived in San Francisco. Leaves drifted across the front steps of the Caldwell home, caught in the lazy breeze of October. Inside, the fireplace glowed softly, and the smell of cinnamon apple cider lingered in the air. Zoe Caldwell, now fully settled into her life with Ethan and Mrs. Bennett, was doing something unexpected for a Saturday morning. She was bored. "Dad, can I come to the office with you?" she asked, head poking into his study. Ethan looked up from his laptop. He raised a brow. "It's Saturday." Zoe shrugged. "You work on Saturdays." "That doesn't mean you have to." She gave him a look, one he'd come to recognize. It said, "You already know I'm going with you. This is just a courtesy." He closed the laptop and smiled. "Grab your coat, Agent Caldwell." At Voxera Systems, the office was quieter on weekends. No suits. No tension, just Ethan, a few engineers on rotation, and now Zoe. She walked beside him like she belonged there. And in a way, she did. They passed glass conference rooms, code war rooms, voice testing chambers. Then Zoe stopped. "Can I see the AI room?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. That was where VoiceGuard lived. Where the system that started everything still quietly ran diagnostics and pattern analysis. Zoe waited, so he nodded. Inside it was cool, quiet. Screens blinked gently like a sleeping city. "This is where it listens?" she asked. "It doesn't listen the way we do," Ethan said. "It processes sound, intent, tone, pattern," Zoe cut in. "But does it understand people?" Ethan paused. "No, it predicts people, but it doesn't understand them." Zoe stared at one of the central monitors, then softly asked, "Could it have predicted what Sloan did to you?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He was staring at her, not just as a father, but as a man who had once thought technology could protect him from pain. "No," he finally said. "It couldn't." Zoe nodded. "Because machines don't know when someone's pretending to care." "But kids do." They left the room in silence. Back in Ethan's office, Zoe sat in her chair, the one labeled Junior Ethics Advisor in Sharpie. She fiddled with a voice sample tool. Then asked, "Can I build something?" Ethan smiled. Always. Over the next few weeks, Zoe worked on a project of her own with Miss Imaz. Bennett's help, she interviewed other kids in the neighborhood, kids in foster care, kids who had been placed with relatives, kids who had lived through systems that asked for facts but ignored feelings. "What do you wish grown-ups had heard?" Zoe would ask. And the answers poured in. "I wasn't angry, I was scared. I didn't lie, I just didn't have the words. I tried to tell someone. No one believed me." Zoe took those stories, and with Ethan's help, she began training VoiceGuard Junior, a lighter AI model designed to pick up emotional dissonance in children's voices. Not to judge, not to accuse, but to flag moments when a child might need help, even when they can't say it out loud. One evening, as Zoe fine-tuned her prototype, Ethan sat across from her. "You're building something that even I didn't think of," he said. Zoe didn't look up. "I'm not building it for companies. I'm building it for courts and schools and caseworkers who don't always listen." Ethan leaned back. "You're not just rewriting the software, Zoe. You're rewriting what it's for." She finally looked up and said something that Ethan would never forget. Technology should help people feel safe, not just watched. Later that week, Ms. Bennett found a stack of printouts on the kitchen counter, feedback forms, notes, drawings from kids who had tested Zoe's tool. One drawing stood out, a stick figure girl with headphones. Beside her, a speech bubble that said, "I'm not okay." Above it, in a child's handwriting, "But now someone hears me." On Friday evening, Zoe was invited to share her project at a youth innovation night hosted by the local university. She didn't dress up, just wore her usual navy hoodie and jeans. But when she stepped up to the microphone, the auditorium fell silent. She began. "A few months ago, I whispered something no one else noticed, and it saved someone I love. But sometimes kids can't speak up. Or they do, and adults don't hear them. So I made a tool not to replace listening, but to remind grown-ups what listening actually sounds like." She clicked a demo. The system played a voice, calm, flat, even-toned, but the AI flagged a subtle tremor in pitch. The message popped up. Emotion, fear, hidden, possibly suppressed. Zoe looked out at the crowd. Just because a kid says "I'm fine" doesn't mean they are. The applause was long and loud. Ethan sat in the front row, eyes misty. Miss Bennett clapped until her palms stung, and somewhere in the back, a young social worker wiped tears from her eyes. That night, back home, Zoe curled up on the couch with a blanket and hot cocoa. Ethan sat beside her. "You know," he said softly, "people are going to remember what you did tonight." Zoe shrugged. "I don't need them to remember me. Just the message." He looked at her and realized this little girl, who had once whispered about a phone that didn't belong, had just given the world a new way to listen. It was just before Thanksgiving when the letter arrived. A crisp envelope bearing the logo of the National Ethics and Technology Council. Ethan Caldwell opened it slowly, standing at the kitchen island while Zoe and Ms. Louise Bennett peeled apples for pie nearby. He read the first line, then smiled. "Well," he said, "we've been invited to Washington." Zoe looked up. "Why?" "They want to honor the VoiceGuard Junior project at the annual Innovation Integrity Awards." Zoe blinked. "Wait, me?" Ms. Bennett chuckled softly. "You didn't think changing the way people listen to children would go unnoticed, did you?" Zoe looked down, suddenly quiet. Ethan saw it in her face. She wasn't afraid of the trip. She was afraid of being seen. That evening, after the house had quieted, Zoe sat cross-legged on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her like armor. Ethan sat nearby, sifting through emails, but mostly just waiting. He'd learned by now that Zoe would talk when she was ready, and she did. "I don't like the stage," she said. "I know.
I don't like the way people look at me like I'm brave. I wasn't brave. I was scared. I was just the only one listening. Ethan closed his laptop. Zoe, he said softly, being scared and acting anyway is bravery. She didn't answer at first. Then, if I go, will you stand beside me? He didn't hesitate.
Always. The ceremony was held in a grand marble hall in D.C. Journalists, tech leaders, educators, and policymakers filled the seats. When Zoe Caldwell stepped onto the stage in her navy dress and red sneakers, the room grew still. She stood at the microphone, looking out at the rows of polished shoes and expensive suits. Then she began. I was adopted 6 months ago. Before that, I lived in a house full of technology. It had everything: smart lights, voice assistants, even a fridge that ordered groceries. But no one really talked. Not about feelings, not about fear, not about truth. Then one day, I heard something that didn't feel right, a phone that didn't belong, a recording that shouldn't exist. And I spoke up. At first, no one listened. But I kept going, because sometimes, even if you're small, you still see what others miss. So I built something that helps adults hear what kids can't always say out loud, not to spy on us, but to notice us. Because I think the world would be better if it paid more attention to whispers, silence, then a standing ovation. Zoe didn't smile. She stepped off the stage and walked straight to Ethan, who met her with open arms. She buried her face in his jacket and finally let herself cry. Back home, life resumed its rhythm. Zoe still hated math. Ethan still burned toast. Ms. Bennett still reminded them both that chores did not pause for national awards, but something had shifted. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. One chilly evening in early December, Zoe and Ethan sat by the fireplace, sipping cocoa. She was unusually quiet. Something on your mind? Ethan asked. Zoe nodded. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't noticed that phone? Ethan considered the question. Honestly? Zoe nodded again. I probably would have lost everything that actually mattered. But you found us instead. Zoe's eyes softened. No, she said. You found me. That weekend, Zoe brought home a new school project. Family history. Share a story that changed your life. She didn't write about adoption papers or FBI raids. She didn't even write about Sloan. Instead, she wrote this. Once, there was a man who forgot how to listen, and a girl who had learned never to speak too loud. But one day, they both realized that the quiet spaces between people are where love has the best chance to grow. They didn't start as a family. They became one truth, one choice. One whisper at a time. On Sunday morning, while Ethan watered the backyard garden, something he and Zoe now did together, she asked, Do you think, if my mom and dad were still alive, we would have ever met? Ethan set down the watering can. He knelt to her level, gently wiping a splash of dirt from her cheek. I don't know, he said. But I do know this: whatever brought you to me, I'm grateful for it, every single day. Zoe smiled, sunlight catching her curls. Me too. And then she said something she hadn't said before. Not fully, not directly, but this time it came out without fear. I love you, Dad. Ethan didn't rush to reply. He just pulled her into a hug and whispered the only words that mattered. I love you more. That night, as Miss Bennett turned off the lights and tucked Zoe in, she paused at the door. Sweet dreams, sweetheart. Zoe looked up. Miss Bennett? Yes, darling. You stayed, even when it got scary, even when it wasn't your job, Miss Tears. Bennett smiled. Because love isn't a job, Zoe. It's a promise. And with that, she closed the door. The hallway was quiet, but from behind the walls, one could hear the faintest hum. Not of machines, but of a house that had finally become a home. It was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in years, the Caldwell house felt like it had earned the twinkle lights glowing in every window. The scent of cinnamon rolls and pine hung in the air. A fire danced quietly in the living room, and soft jazz from an old vinyl record played as if time itself had finally slowed down. Ethan stood in the kitchen, wearing a ridiculous red apron Zoe had picked out. Across from him, Miss Bennett was taste-testing frosting, and near the fireplace, Zoe sat wrapping the last of her gifts, tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. None of them said it aloud, but all three knew. This was the first year that felt like belonging. Earlier that week, Zoe had asked a question that lingered in Ethan's mind. Why do people leave when things get hard? He hadn't answered at the time, because the truth was, he used to be one of those people. When his co-founder betrayed him, Ethan had pulled back. When his parents divorced, he stopped returning calls. And when Zoe first arrived, he treated her more like a responsibility than a daughter. But Zoe never pulled away, even when no one believed her, even when she stood alone in a boardroom whispering truth. She stayed. And that's what made all the difference. That night, after dinner and cocoa and far too many cookies, Zoe brought out an envelope.
Wait, Ethan said. I thought we weren't opening gifts until morning. This one's different, Zoe replied. She handed it to Miss
Bennett. Inside was a handwritten card. On the front it said, "To the person who saw me first. Saul." Bennett opened it slowly. "Dear Ms. Bennett, when I moved in, everything was smart. But you were the only one who was kind. You noticed when I was quiet. You listened without making me explain.
And you never made me feel like a burden. You didn't have to love me, but you chose to. So this Christmas, I want you to know, you're not just the heart of this house. You're my grandma.
Forever." Tears slipped silently down Ms. Bennett's cheeks. She folded the card carefully and pulled Zoe into her arms.
Thank you, baby, she whispered. That means more than you'll ever know. Later, while Zoe was upstairs brushing her teeth, Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter beside Ms. Bennett.
"She changed me," he said quietly. "You changed each other," Ms. Bennett replied.
Ethan hesitated, then looked over, eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "I never asked why you stayed."
"All those years, even when the house was cold, even when I wasn't worth staying for, Miss..." Bennett reached for the kettle. "I stayed because this house needed someone to remember it could be warm again, and because I saw who you were, long before you remembered." Ethan blinked.
"I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." She gave him a warm smile. "You saw it in the only way that matters. You showed up." Christmas morning arrived with the kind of hush only fresh snow can bring. Zoe ran down the stairs in oversized slippers, dragging her blanket like a cape. She found a small gift box under the tree with her name on it, but the handwriting wasn't Ethan's. It was Ms. Bennett's. Inside was a silver pendant. Simple, elegant, etched into the back. "Your voice saved more than a company." Zoe held it tight. "I'm going to wear it every day," she said. Ethan handed her a second gift. A plain manila folder. Inside were adoption documents, already signed. "Already finalized. Not the ones from before," he said. "These are different. These are because I want to be your dad, not just on paper, but forever." Zoe's eyes filled instantly. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She just threw her arms around his neck and held on like she never wanted to let go. That night, after the last of the hot chocolate had been poured and the fire had gone from dancing to glowing, Zoe sat by the window with her tablet. She wasn't playing games, she was writing a letter. Not for school, not for the public, just for herself. "This year, I learned that people don't have to be perfect to stay. They just have to choose you on the hard days, not just the easy ones. And love isn't loud. Sometimes it's in the way someone makes you tea, or shows up at your school play, or remembers that you hate mustard. I used to think being adopted meant someone took me in, but now I know I took them in too. And together, we became a family. Not by blood, not by name, but by choice. She saved it.
Then set down her tablet, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything. She was home.
2 years later, the Voice Guard Junior project had changed more lives than anyone had imagined. It was now being piloted in 42 school districts across the US. Family courts had adopted the system to help identify emotional distress in children testifying under pressure. Social workers used it as a quiet tool to flag invisible cries for help, and the name Zoe Caldwell had appeared in more articles than she liked. But Zoe, she stayed the same, still quiet, still observant, still happiest with a sketch pad and a dog-eared notebook by the window. She didn't crave attention, she craved meaning. One spring morning, Zoe stood in front of her 5th grade class, giving a presentation on heroes. She wasn't nervous. She'd practiced the speech 100 times with Ethan, who now insisted on listening from the hallway to avoid jinxing her groove. The classroom hushed as Zoe began. Most people think heroes wear capes, or uniforms, or speak loudly. But I think heroes are people who stay, people who listen, even when it's uncomfortable, people who choose to love someone they didn't have to. She clicked to the next slide. A photo of her, Ethan, and Ms. Bennett at the Ethics Innovation Awards. My dad built technology that could have been used to control people, but when he found out, he protected people instead. My grandma, Ms. Bennett, didn't just raise me. She saved me because she believed in kindness when no one else was paying attention. And I guess I helped a little too, because sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truth. The class clapped politely, but Ethan, listening through the door, had to blink away tears. That evening, as they walked home through the budding trees lining their street, Zoe slipped her hand into Ethan's. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't said anything that day?" she asked. Ethan thought for a moment. "I'd probably still be in that boardroom, still thinking I had everything, while having nothing." Zoe looked up at him. "You think we would have found each other anyway?" He smiled. "I think some things are meant to happen, even if the road there isn't perfect." Zoe nodded. "I'm glad it was this road." Back at home, Mrs. Bennett was pruning the garden she and Zoe had planted the summer before. It wasn't perfect. Some stems bent awkwardly. A few flowers were late bloomers, but it grew, and it kept growing. Much like the family that now lived in the house. That night, as stars blinked awake above the city, Ethan sat with Zoe on the back porch, sharing a blanket. She held her favorite book. He held a cup of tea. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of what had been lost, full of what had been found, full of what they chose every day to protect. Zoe turned slightly, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you think people can ever really feel safe?" Ethan answered slowly. "I think people feel safe when they're seen, when they're believed, when someone stands next to them and says, 'I'm not going anywhere.'" Zoe closed her eyes. "You're not going anywhere, right?" "Never," he said. A few days later, a letter arrived. This time, not from a council or agency or award committee. It was handwritten. On simple paper, no return address. Inside, "My name is Lily. I'm 11. Your story helped someone believe me. So now I'm not afraid to talk anymore. Thank you for building something that listens. I want to be like you when I grow up." Zoe folded the letter and put it in her shoebox under the bed, the one where she kept only things that mattered. And that night, she added a new piece of paper to the box. It read, "Some people want to change the world. I just want to help it listen better." Spring turned to summer.
and summer to fall, and the house on the hill, once filled with silence and suspicion, now echoed with laughter, piano practice, and the occasional argument over who actually fed the cat. It wasn't a perfect family, but it was real. Built not by bloodline or legality or performance, but by choice. By showing up, by staying, by listening when the world didn't. On Zoe's 11th birthday, she blew out the candles and made a wish. Ms. Bennett asked, "Are you going to tell us what it was?" Zoe smiled. Already came true. And later that night, as Ethan tucked her in, she asked a final question, one he'd waited a long time to hear. "Do you ever think I saved you?" He looked at her. All the time. In a world increasingly run by algorithms and high-speed transactions, this story reminds us of something timeless. Truth often whispers before it shouts, and love shows up not with grand gestures, but quiet presence. Zoe Caldwell was just 8 years old. She didn't have a title, or a resume, or influence. But she had what many adults forget to use: intuition, observation, and the courage to speak up. Her quiet bravery uncovered deception at the highest level. Yet what made this story unforgettable wasn't the corporate scandal, it was what happened after. It was the man who realized being a good father had nothing to do with DNA. It was the woman who saw value in a child no one else believed in. It was a child who taught grown-ups how to really listen. To anyone watching this, you are never too old to choose kindness, to stand beside truth, or to become the family someone never had. Because in the end, it's not the tech, the titles, or the trophies that matter. It's who shows up. It's who stays, and it's who listens when no one else will.